before they go into effect. This amendment is a common-sense approach to ensure Americans are getting the cause-worthy benefits that we need out of regulations. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and at this time, it's my honor to yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, co-author of the amendment.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I extend my thanks to my colleague from Illinois for joining me in co-sponsoring what I believe is a very important amendment. We offer this amendment because we have concerns with EPA's intent to proceed with a Tier 3 rulemaking which would establish new fuel specification standards without justifying these with the sufficient data that has already been called to be conducted under a study in a previous bill. In 2007, Congress included a provision in the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 that directed EPA to study and implement fuel changes to negate any detrimental air quality impact resulting from the renewable fuel standard. EPA has not conducted this required study. I'm concerned that EPA may be moving too quickly with Tier 3 regulations. EPA should complete the study first and provide for adequate comment and feedback from stakeholders before proceeding with a proposed rule. Any proposed changes to gasoline sulfur content and vapor pressure should be backed by sound data. These reductions must be justified because they have real cost. I have concerns about the effects these new regulations could have on refiners. These costs could result in decreased gasoline supplies and possible refinery closures, both of which could undermine our nation's energy security. Our amendment simply adds any proposed Tier 3 rulemaking to the list of regulations where EPA must conduct additional analysis as outlined in TRAIN. This additional study will ensure that all of the costs and impacts are known before EPA proceeds with its proposal. I hope my colleagues in the House can support this straightforward amendment. It simply calls on an agency to simply do that which it was directed to do years ago before proceeding, and not to basically proceed before you have the vital information on which to base some very important regulations. And with that, I would yield back and again thank my colleague.
The gentleman yields back.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I'll reserve.
Gentleman reserves. What does the gentleman from Illinois rise or seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, even if this amendment passes to improve the study of EPA rules, that will not address the underlying problems with this bill. Proponents of this bill imply that it simply requires EPA to study the cumulative impact of EPA rules. That is false. What began as a bill to study EPA rules has morphed into a bill to actually block the EPA rules. In fact, the bill blocks and indefinitely delays two of the most important air pollution rules in decades. First, the bill blocks the EPA from finalizing a proposed rule to cut toxic air pollution from power plants, which are the most egregious and the largest source of toxic mercury pollution in our nation. Mercury is dangerous in small amounts, and mercury can damage the developing brain of infants and our children. The proposed rule will prevent more than 90% of mercury in coal from being emitted into the air. The rule also reduced fine particle emissions by more than a quarter, producing tremendous widespread health benefits. For each year this bill delays the mercury and air toxic standard rule, it will allow up to additional 17,000 premature deaths, 120,000 cases of asthma, and 850 days when people will miss work due to illness. But that's not all. The bill also blocks the EPA from implementing the cross-state air pollution rule to require 27 states to reduce power plant emissions that pollute the air in downwind states. Each year of delay in implementing this rule will produce up to an additional 35,000 premature deaths, 400 cases of asthma, and 1.8 million days when people will miss work or school due to illnesses. The benefits of these rules far exceeds the cost. For the cross-state air pollution rule alone, the pollution reductions will yield annual health benefits that outweigh the rule's cost by up to 350 to 1. The bill creates a new government bureaucracy to produce a study of EPA rules. But this study is just a Trojan horse to disguise the true intent of this legislation, to block and to delay two important EPA rules to protect public health from air pollution. The bill that emerged from committee already is a horrible, a terrible bill, but it promises to get even worse, significantly worse, as my Republican colleagues amend this horrible and horrendous bill that's before us. Mr. Whitfield himself has offered an amendment to completely nullify the two power plant rules and force EPA to start all the way back to the beginning, to start from scratch, but with new limits on what the agency can do to reduce pollution. According to the EPA administrators, these changes could prevent the EPA from ever reissuing these same rules, deny them in the future, far into the future, from ever reissuing these same rules. Mr. Latta has offered an amendment that strikes at the heart of the Clean Air Act by requiring the EPA to prioritize cost over public health when settling national air quality standards. These standards form the foundation for why we have been able to clean up air pollution, and Mr. Latta wants to throw it out.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, can I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
Gentleman has 1 minute.
Okay, I'll yield the balance of my time to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Green.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank my colleague from Illinois for yielding to me. The EPA is currently developing a Tier 3 rulemaking that would further reduce sulfur levels in gasoline to an average of 10 parts per million, a 70% change from today's already low standards while reducing the gasoline volatility. The EPA expecting to issue a proposed rule by the end of this year. The problem we have is that in the Energy Act, Independence and Security Act of 2007, Section 209 required the EPA to conduct a study 18 months after the enactment to determine whether the renewable fuels required by the section would adversely impact air quality, and not later than 3 years after that enactment. The problem is the EPA has not finished that study, and we required them to conduct even before these new regulations. Now they're moving forward with a rule with a half-baked study, and that's why I support this amendment to the Train Act, Mr. Speaker. This is not a delay amendment. This is just to make sure we don't get the cart in front of the horse, and we need to have that study finished before the EPA moves forward with that sulfur criteria. And that's why I support my colleague from Illinois and my colleague from Texas' amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired.
My colleagues to support it. And yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
I ask for a roll call vote on this amendment.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois will be postponed. The committee will rise informally to receive a message.
House will be in order. Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed without amendment H.R. 2883, cited as the Child and Family Services Improvement and Innovation Act.
The committee will resume its sitting.
The committee will be in order. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in the House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
For the purpose of offering an amendment, which is at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in House Report number 112-213, offered by Mr. Dent of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment simply adds the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, NESHAP, or Cement MAC, to the covered rules within H.R. 2401. Reasonable efforts to limit the emissions of hazardous pollutants by cement manufacturing facilities are most certainly appropriate, but EPA has failed to craft effective and efficient regulations. These NESHAP standards will be very, very difficult and extremely costly for domestic cement manufacturers to meet, severely jeopardizing their ability of an essential American basic industry to remain competitive with foreign importers. Including NESHAP in H.R. 2401 will allow the loss of American jobs and the weakening of domestic manufacturers' global competitiveness to become key considerations during the completion of the rulemaking process. We must understand the impacts of these rules on jobs and our manufacturing competitiveness. Now, some simple basic facts about the American cement industry. And I represent the largest cement-producing district in America, co-chair of the Cement Caucus along with Congressman Mike Ross of Arkansas. This industry employs about 13,000 Americans. 4,000 of those jobs have been lost since 2008. There are 97 cement plants in America producing today. And there's a presence in nearly every state as well, I might add. Cement is an absolutely essential, basic industry in American manufacturing. It plays a major role in the development of our nation's infrastructure. And I think we need to better understand some of this background, too, regarding these NESHAP rules. NESHAP, of course, amends EPA's Maximum Achievable Control Technology, or MAC, and performance standards for cement kilns. And this is utilizing an unrealistic pollutant-by-pollutant approach for the application of MAC. MAC requirements are designed to direct industries toward the pollution control technology used by the best performers in a certain industry sector. And it cobbles together a range of different performance characteristics applicable to different pollutants without determining if it is feasible or even possible for any one kiln to comply with all of these standards. Truth is, there's not a single cement manufacturing plant in America that can comply with all these standards simultaneously. So the chemical composition, too, of key cement inputs, such as limestone, vary from region to region. And consequently, NESHAP will have disproportionate impacts on different manufacturing locations across the country, just simply based on the type of limestone being used in the process of manufacturing cement. And we should talk, too, about the impacts on the domestic cement industry. $2.2 billion worth of compliance costs, and that's an EPA estimate. $3.4 billion in compliance costs, that's the industry estimate. So there's a lot of cost here. We're in the billions. There are numerous plants. There are estimates from 12 to 18 of these plants across the country that may be idled or permanently shut down. And these are massive facilities, tremendous capital investment. And we believe that the national price for Portland cement may increase by 5.4%. Domestic production will fall by 11%. Thousands of high-quality jobs could or would be lost. You know, one major domestic cement producer has already publicly announced that due to other regulatory uncertainties of this NESHAP and other pending regulations, it is halting construction of a new state-of-the-art cement kiln, suspending over $350 million in new investment and the creation of over 1,500 construction jobs. And with respect to global emissions, what will this mean? The reduction of domestic production of cement will naturally lead to an increase in our nation's reliance on foreign cement. And I can assure you, those foreign producers are not going to be complying with the NESHAP rule. So this is going to shift overseas production, will likely increase global greenhouse emissions in two ways. First, transporting cement to the U.S. from international markets will require tremendous amounts of fossil fuels, substantially increasing the amount of carbon emitted per unit of cement used. And second, foreign suppliers will be manufactured in countries with little or no environmental protections. So it's critically important that EPA produce realistic and achievable regulations, including NESHAP and H.R. 2401, will help EPA take into account the economic impact of its flawed regulations, and a more thorough economic analysis will lead to a better final rule. And finally, I wanted to say one thing. The federal stimulus law is actually helping to finance the construction of a cement importation terminal in Staten Island, New York City, designed to displace many cement workers in my district and all across the northeastern United States, using federal money to create a handful of jobs while displacing many in basic industry and manufacturing. That's got to stop. Pass this amendment and then pass the underlying bill. Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I claim time in opposition for the purposes of the debate.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, many organizations are on record opposing the TRAIN Act or opposing efforts to block rules to reduce pollution from the country's dirtiest power plants. Numerous public health groups, including the American Lung Association, the American Public Health Association, the American Thoracic Society, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, they all sent a record to Congress expressing their support for full implementation of the Clean Air Act and opposing all, and I quote, all efforts to weaken, delay, or block progress toward the continuing implementation of this vital law, end of quote. The American Public Health Association stated that it opposes the TRAIN Act because it, and I quote again, is ill-conceived legislation that will prevent the EPA from protecting the public's health from dangerous and deadly air pollution, end of quote. The National Association of Clean Air Agencies opposes this bill as well. NACA sent a letter expressing its concern that the TRAIN Act, quote, would create regulatory delays that could lead to thousands of premature deaths, remove important regulatory tools upon which states and localities depend, impose additional costs on government as well as small businesses, create regulatory uncertainty, causes jobs losses, and defund an important and cost-effective air pollution control program, end of quote. Groups representing millions of individual Americans who believe in protecting our environment strongly opposes this bill and other efforts to weaken clean air protections. These groups include the League of Conservative Voters, the Sierra Club, National Resources Defense Fund, Environment America, the National Audubon Society, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. They stated in a letter to Congress, quoting, saying, and I quote, sacrificing tens of thousands of American lives will not create more jobs. Poisoning the air our children and our families breathe will not stimulate the economy, end of quote. 300 sportsmen's organizations representing our nation's hunters, anglers, and the businesses that depend on our wildlife and natural resources support the EPA's effort to cut mercury pollution, and I quote them with these words: they said strongly opposing any effort to weaken the Clean Air Act, end of quote. The Evangelical Environmental Network has been running radio ads expressing their opposition to efforts to block the mercury and air toxics rule. Mercury can damage the developing brain of fetuses and children, causing learning disabilities and neurological problems. The president of this group stated, and I quote, "We believe that mercury offers a significant potential for hindering our children from developing a pure and wonderful life," end of quote. The Obama administration strongly opposes the TRAIN Act. The administration has threatened to veto this legislation if it ever reaches the president's desk, as the bill would undermine decades of progress in cleaning up the nation's air quality by, and this is a quote from the Obama administration, by blocking the EPA's ability to move forward with these two long overdue Clean Air Act rules, end of quote. Americans don't support weakening the Clean Air Act or blocking efforts to reduce dangerous air pollution from power plants. The widespread opposition to the TRAIN Act makes that perfectly clear. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose this horrendous bill.
Gentleman's time is expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 7, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 2401 is a toxic bill that attempts to dismantle any government regulation to protect our nation's public health and environment. To set the stage for my brief remarks, let me cite to all the American public the Executive Order number 12,866, which says each agency shall assess both the costs and the benefits of the intended regulation, and recognizing that some costs and benefits are difficult to quantify, propose or adopt a regulation only upon a reasoned determination that the benefits of the intended regulation justify its costs. Now, we've been operating under that particular provision for a substantial period of time, and quite frankly, Congress's decisions with reference to the Clean Air Act, signed by President Richard Nixon in 1970, came about as a result of continuing arguments from industry that cleaning up air pollution was too expensive or not feasible. This bill forbids the Environmental Protection Agency from finalizing both mercury and toxic standards rule, and, importantly, the cross-state air pollution rule, requiring coal-fired power plants without modern pollution controls to install controls to reduce emissions of mercury and other toxic air pollutants, fine particulates, and the pollutants that cause smog and acid rain. In the Rules Committee, I spoke about being in Lewitny in Poland and watching the pollution that was destroying the Black Forest in another country in Germany. We have that take place in our states, where one state is offering emissions that come down on another state's population. And therefore, the cross-state air pollution rule said that coal-fired plants should install modern pollution controls. And guess what? 60% of them, including one of the largest producers of electricity in this country, Exelon, in Illinois, do favor these same rules that are being sought to be delayed. And they favor them for the reason that, among other things, it has produced jobs and it has cured the problems that have been pointed out by the American Lung Association and countless other organizations that favor the Clean Air Act and are opposed to delaying further two particularly important measures that would allow for pollution to continue to be cleaned up. At Port Everglades in Florida, right outside my constituency, for all of the years that I've lived there, and that nears 50, this coal-powered plant has been producing emissions. Over the course of time, they have reduced those emissions. And Florida Power and Light very recently indicated that they're going to do everything that they can to meet the emission standards rather than sit up and try and oppose them, because they recognize, one, that they do have all of the juice, if you can call electricity that, and in the final analysis, those of us that benefit from it are going to wind up paying more. But to pay more to make sure that children don't have asthma, and to make sure that people don't have lung pollution, and to make sure that lakes don't go dead from mercury, or that fish don't have in them more mercury than they rightly should for food consumption, then I'm willing to pay more. And I believe most Americans are as well, in order that we will have clean air.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
To speak in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I have great admiration for the gentleman from Florida, who is always eloquent in his remarks. And I would say he started off his support of his amendment by saying that we're trying to dismantle any regulation. And I would like to remind everyone once again that this bill applies to 14 Department EPA regulations. And we do not delay in any way 12 of them. And on the other two, we delay one of them, both of them, 6 months after the final report is due. Now, he had mentioned that Exelon supported the new EPA regulations. Exelon is a company that we all admire and respect, but it's a nuclear energy company, so there's nothing in these regulations that has any impact on them as far as I know. But all of these regulations are trying to drive the coal industry out of business that still provides 50% of all the electricity in America. Now, in the TRAIN Act, we simply asked this independent government agency composed of Obama administration appointees to examine the cumulative impact of all of these rules, because EPA has never been quite this aggressive. And I might add that the two rules that we asked to delay for further analysis, an independent research group said that the annualized cost would be almost $18 billion that utilities would have to spend to buy equipment that may not be able to even then achieve the standards because the technology is not available. And the issue is not about mercury. The utilities do a great job of cleaning up mercury, and EPA itself said that its utility MAC would only benefit, the benefit of the utility MAC would be only 0.004% attributable to mercury, because 99% of mercury in America comes from nature and from outside other countries that the trade winds bring into our country. So utilities don't object to the mercury part of this, but they're now adding hydrogen fluoride and hydrogen chloride, of which there is no technology available to achieve the standard that EPA is setting. So because of the cost, because of the unique vulnerability of our economy today, 12 of these regulations we don't delay at all. We just say, let's study the cumulative impact, which the President asked for in his executive order that he issued recently. He said, we need to look at the cumulative impact. That's what we're trying to do. So for that reason, this amendment would basically say you don't look at the cumulative amendment. You just take the existing studies that have been made. And I would also say that EPA didn't even do any study on the greenhouse gas, which we're only trying to analyze the full cost of that. So for those reasons, I would respectfully oppose the gentleman's amendment and would retain and balance my time.
The gentleman from Florida has used all of his time. So
I yield back to balance my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote and ask for support of my amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and ask for its consideration.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Deutsche Bank, the biggest bank in Europe, recently issued a report on global clean energy investment opportunities in which it stated, and I quote, countries with more TLC, transparency, longevity, and certainty in their climate policy frameworks will attract more investment and build new clean industries, technologies, and jobs faster than their policy-lagging counterparts, unquote. The TRAIN Act is one more step in the wrong direction by the same Republican House which has held over 110 anti-environmental votes. This unprecedented assault on the environment has devastating consequences for our economy. As the Deutsche Bank report said, Germany and China have emerged as global leaders in low-carbon technologies and investment. The net effect is that while Congress stumbles, the U.S. stands to fall behind, unquote. This investor report from Europe's largest bank identified several policy failures that are impeding job growth here at home. First, Congress has not established a carbon reduction target or required polluters to pay for the cost of greenhouse gas pollution. Congress does not have a national renewable energy standard or even an energy efficient standard. The Deutsche Bank report notes that the lack of these regulations and incentives has actually forced investors to make investments elsewhere, including in China and other countries, rather than here at home in America. As a result, we've lost solar and other advanced technology market share to our competitors. My simple amendment to the TRAIN Act establishes a simple process to identify policies that should be adopted and implemented by the United States to provide domestic job growth and to ensure that our nation is internationally competitive in the $5 trillion global energy industry for clean energy technology development and manufacturing. Business leaders have urged Congress to adopt both a regulatory framework and a system of incentives to spur clean energy job creation. In addition to the regulation that Deutsche Bank identified as supporting investment, American entrepreneurs have called on Congress to expand public financing for clean energy. This month, members of the American Energy Innovation Council visited Capitol Hill to express their strong support for just that concept. This group included venture capitalist John Doerr, former Lockheed Martin CEO Norm Augustine, and Bill Gates of Microsoft. The American Energy Innovation Council recently issued a report which stated, as business leaders, we feel that America's current energy system is deficient in ways that cause serious harm to our economy, our national security, and our environment. To correct these deficiencies, we must make a serious commitment to modernizing our energy system with cleaner and more efficient technologies. This Republican House is an anchor that's dragging down the American economy. Its continued obsession with austerity and opposition to any economic recovery programs, including clean energy, mean that America falls behind while China surges ahead. We cannot afford to let China and Germany dominate industries such as clean technology. My simple amendment will establish a process to start restoring American leadership in this important sector for economic growth. Rather than repealing common-sense public health standards, we ought to be focused on measures like my amendment, which support high-tech job growth. I ask my colleagues to vote for this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
To speak in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
While I have great regard for the gentleman from Virginia, I must rise to oppose this amendment. In his 2008 convention speech, Barack Obama promised to create 5 million green energy jobs. The article in the New York Times headlines, "Where the Jobs Aren't." And the whole article talks about all the government money that's being spent to subsidize green energy today. And they gave an example of one government program that provided $300 million to a company, and they created 150 jobs at turns out to be a cost of $2 million for every job. The reason that solar and wind are not taking off is that they are too expensive and too inefficient. Now, having said that, I recognize that they have a part in our economy. They have a part in producing electricity, but they can never be the base load. That cannot be attained. We cannot provide enough electricity without coal, nuclear, and natural gas. Now, this amendment gives special attention to the green energy field. And I would remind everyone once again that renewable energy subsidies increased over the last 3 years by 186%, from $5 billion to $14 billion. Renewables saw by far the largest increase in federal benefits. Wind alone received a tenfold increase in subsidies, from $476 million to almost $5 billion. Solar increased by more than, let me just finish this one sentence. Solar increased by a factor of 6, from $179 million to $1.2 billion. So these industries can't work without government support, and I don't object to government supporting them, But they do not need to get even more special privilege from this amendment, and I'd be happy to yield the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. I would inquire, what would be the comparable number for oil and gas and coal in the United States?
Well, I can tell you...
You talk about the growth trend, but in absolute numbers, is it not true that actually the fossil fuels industry gets $70 billion a year?
Well, the direct expenditure for coal was $42 million last year. Wind was $3,556 million. I will tell you, oil and gas and coal are willing to give up all their subsidies if the green energy wants to give up their subsidies, because they're getting a lot more than anyone else. But at this point, I would retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman retains. The gentleman from Virginia.
I would inquire of the chair how much time is left on this side.
The gentleman from Virginia has 1 minute remaining.
I thank the chair. To conclude on this matter, I find it very sad, and I have enormous respect for my colleague on the other side, but to oppose a simple study, to require that we look at the benefits of clean energy technology, I find very troubling. And that resistance, sadly, is going to impede American growth and competitiveness, and is actually going to cost us jobs. There is no question that in the coal industry in particular, we've kind of reached a plateau. In fact, in the state of Kentucky, we've lost a lot of jobs relative to, say, 30 years ago. Whereas, as my colleague from Massachusetts pointed out last night, in wind energy, just in the last 4 years, we're up to 80,000 jobs. It's a fast-growing, lucrative part of our economy. It helps, it's clean, and it actually helps create jobs concretely. That's a worthwhile thing to study, if not invest in, and I regret the fact that the manager on the other side finds even a study something to be resisted.
The gentleman's
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Once again, I oppose the amendment. The green energy is getting every benefit possible from this administration, money, studies, and every other way, and it will never be able to meet the base load of our electricity needs, and therefore, unless we can continue to have low-cost electricity, we're not going to compete in the global marketplace, and we're going to continue to lose jobs. And this EPA is making direct attacks against an industry. And for that reason, I respectfully oppose the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that matter, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to support my amendment. I call my amendment, Can We All Get Along? It is an amendment simply to ask that all of those who are impacted by this proposed legislation to have an expanded time to be able to present their views. It is a Can We All Get Along type amendment because it is important to note again that those of us who come from different states, whether it's Illinois or Texas, recognize that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Air Act were formulated under a bipartisan Congress, signed, as my colleague reminded us, by President Richard Nixon. Republicans and Democrats voted for the Clean Air Act and the Environmental Protection Agency's jurisdiction. It's important to note that there is not only value in what the EPA does, but there are organizations such as the American Lung Association, American Thoracic Society, Physicians for Social Responsibility, American Public Health Association, Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, who need their input and are concerned about this legislation. Mr. Chairman, I would like at the appropriate time to submit this letter from those organizations into the record, please.
Objection to order.
Thank you very much. And so my concern as we move forward on the transparency and regulatory analysis of impacts is how much time has been given for the public comment. My state, in fact, has been impacted for the lack thereof of public comment. I believe that there are civilians who are not businesses who should be protected and given the opportunity to have input. For example, it's important to note that the Mercury and Air Toxic Standard Rule, which I don't think my colleagues can in any way dissuade me from believing, has been the basis of preventing 17,000 premature deaths, 11,000 heart attacks, 120,000 cases of aggregated asthma, 12,000 hospital and emergency room visits, 11,000 cases of bronchitis, and 850,000 missed days. The idea of putting a super layer over the already existing regulatory scheme, to me, sounds like we are adhering to the super committee concept, which many of us, by way of absolute necessity, voted on during the debt ceiling debate. But we realize that the responsibility of the purse strings is in the United States House of Representatives. Well, the law has given authority to the EPA and the Clean Air Act as its authorizing aspect to be able to control and balance. I believe we should create jobs, but the question becomes whether or not the TRAIN Act, in the format of adding another layer of review, actually does that. Or does it create another level of bureaucracy that we neither want nor need? At a time when these regulations will both decrease health costs and can create thousands of jobs, why would my colleagues propose a bill that will only slow job growth? It has been 260 days, and I think we should, as I started out, get along, try to create jobs, recognize the value of the EPA, find a way to be able to resolve the present conflict on the cross-state air pollution rule, but not eliminate the authority and the oversight of the Environmental Protection Agency. What I would say to my colleagues is that the EPA has protected all of our constituents. And therefore, I think it's important to pass this amendment because it's about constituents. It's about constituents no matter what side of the aisle they're on. This is an amendment that moves the public comment from 90 days to 120 days. There may have been some who wanted to comment who could not comment because they did not have the amount of time. So I'd ask my colleagues to support this Can We All Get Along amendment, and I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
First, I would like to say to the gentlelady from Texas who does such a great job on all these issues that we do not intend in any way to remove any of the authority of EPA to regulate the cross-state transport rules. As a matter of fact, of the 14 rules that we're examining that EPA has issued, 12 of them we do not delay in any way. And on the air transport rule, we simply go back to the original air transport rule, which EPA talked about all the marvelous benefits of it. EPA defended it in court. The environmental groups supported it. 67 and 53% reductions in SO2 and NOx emissions. And so that will remain in effect. And as far as the gentlelady's amendment, we'd be happy to accept it because I think it's a good amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Well, let me indicate to the gentleman, first of all, that I thank him for accepting the amendment, and I conclude my remarks by saying that my asking for a roll call vote is not in any way a reflection of my lack of acceptance, but I'm just so gratified for this time frame that I hope that the gentleman will encourage those to support the amendment. Therefore, let me say to the gentleman, I finish on this note. There is some thought that we're putting another regulatory scheme, but I think the important point from my perspective is that there was value when Richard Nixon signed the bill, and how do we find a way to make this work so that we save lives and we create jobs. I think my amendment provides the opportunity for that kind of input, and I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Gentlelady from Texas.
Roll call.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report 112-213. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Speak in favor of my amendment.
The clerk will
I have an
designate
amendment at the desk.
Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report Number 112-213, offered by Mr. Whitfield of Kentucky.
Pursuant to House Resolution 406, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Thank you. As it's already been stated today that the TRAIN Act examines 14 EPA regulations. On 12 of them, we do not delay in any way, but we do ask for a study of the cumulative impact on jobs, on American competitiveness, on the price of electricity, and the reliability of electricity. And we do that because we're a very fragile time in our economy. We have a high unemployment. We've been unable to get out of it. And in order to do it, we have to have some certainty on these regulations. Business people tell us they're not investing right now because of uncertainty about health care, uncertainty about the new financial regulations, uncertainty about the plethora of EPA regulations coming down the road. So although we don't touch 12 regulations, the two that we are concerned about, and the reason we're concerned about them is that they are the most expensive ever issued by EPA. Independent analysts have indicated that there will be a net, after including job gains, a net loss of almost 1.4 million jobs. So my amendment would do this. It would provide that the cross-state air pollution rule has no legal force or effect. And it does direct EPA to continue to apply the Clean Air Interstate Rule, which is in effect today. And as I had indicated earlier, EPA, when they adopted CARE, they talked about the billions of dollars in health benefits, 17,000 premature deaths that they would prevent, 22,000 non-fatal heart attacks that they would prevent, and I can go on and on and on. And EPA defended the CARE Act in court. The environmental groups supported the CARE Act. So our air transport rules and regulations are still going to be in effect. And we simply say that for at least 3 years, EPA cannot change the CARE Act, but during that time do a more detailed analysis of the cross-state air pollution rule because of the enormous cost, the enormous impact on jobs, and so forth. The amendment also requires that the proposed utility maximum achievable control technology rule has no legal force in effect, and that any subsequent utility MAC rule be issued no sooner than 1 year after the study in the call for in the TRAIN Act. So we simply ask EPA to repropose the utility rule. Now, people are saying, oh my gosh, if we don't have this utility rule in effect, Mercury is going to do all of these horrible things. I would remind everyone once again, EPA says that 99% of the mercury in America comes from nature and from trade winds coming in from other countries. And EPA itself said utility MAC benefits by mercury reductions of the whole of that whole bill would be 0.004%. So I would also say utility companies have no problem with mercury. They're doing a good job on that, and they can do even better. But the two gases that they're asking them to regulate have never been regulated before. They, I had the name of them a while ago and I can't remember them, but the technology is not available to meet the requirements of the Utility Act. So you're asking these companies to spend this money, provide this uncertainty, and so that's what my amendment does. It basically delays the implementation of Utility Act, asks for a reproposal, and it also maintains the existing CARE air transport rule. And with that, I would retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman retains time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in strong opposition to this Whitfield amendment, Mr. Chairman. The amendment is objectionable from the standpoint of public health and the legislative process. Throughout the debate on this bill, Mr. Whitfield has claimed that his bill just requires a study and delays 2 rules for further analysis. Well, the indefinite delay of these 2 rules is terrible for public health, but this amendment would be a disaster because this amendment nullifies these 2 critical EPA rules to cut air pollution from old, dirty power plants by requiring them to install modern pollution technology. First, the EPA amendment abolishes EPA mercury air toxics proposal, requiring EPA to start from scratch on a rule that's long overdue. There are 2 rules at stake. The EPA mercury air toxic rule, which was proposed by EPA, would prevent 17,000 deaths, 11,000 heart attacks, 120,000 cases of aggravated asthma, and 850,000 lost work days each year. Now, that doesn't even include the benefits that are harder to put a dollar figure on, such as reducing toxic air pollution that can lead to birth defects and developmental delays. The EPA rule would also prevent 91% of the mercury in burned coal from being emitted into the air. Mercury is dangerous in tiny amounts. It's a powerful neurotoxin that can damage the developing brain, leading to learning disabilities and developmental delays in children. Well, we heard about the delay in letting this rule go forward that was in the bill, but this amendment negates these benefits and ensures that power plants will not have to reduce their emissions of toxic air pollution, including mercury, for at least 7 years. The amendment also tosses aside the way EPA has long been setting these emission limits for toxic air pollution for 2 decades, and it replaces it with an entirely new approach for power plants that is completely unworkable. It guarantees years of litigation, and according to the EPA administrator, may well prevent EPA from ever requiring power plants to clean up their mercury pollution. So this isn't just a delay, as we were told, for further study. It may well lead to no rule ever being put in place to stop these mercury emissions that cause such terrible public health disasters. The Whitfield Amendment also nullifies the cross-state air pollution rule, which is designed to reduce emissions from power plants that cause ozone and particulate matter violations in downwind states. Well, this rule has tremendous health benefits. The EPA cross-state rule will prevent 34,000 deaths, 15,000 heart attacks, 400,000 cases of aggravated asthma, and 1.8 million lost days of work each year. And the Whitfield Amendment negates these benefits and ensures that power plants will not have to reduce their pollution for at least 8 years. But this new rule may assure that it will never happen. The EPA administrator testified that the language in the amendment, barring reliance on modeling, likely will result in EPA from ever issuing another cross-state pollution rule to address ozone and particulate problems in the downwind states. These are 2 radical proposals, and they're coming to the floor without a single day of hearings in the Energy and Commerce Committee. The amendment's sponsor, Mr. Whitfield, is the chairman of the relevant subcommittee, But he didn't ask for a single day of testimony or debate on these proposals. Instead, he took a bill that asked for a lot more analysis before rules go into effect, and then just dropped this amendment on that bill because it was a moving train. He didn't insist that the Train Act was requiring a study. He insisted it was only going to do a study, and then now it's preventing them from implementing anything. Today we have 10 minutes to debate whether this body should eliminate two critical EPA rules that prevent premature death, asthma attacks, and other respiratory diseases, and fundamentally alter the Clean Air Act. I find that inexcusable, both on the substance and the process. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my